91 days. That is how long it had been, the morning I sat down to tell you this, since I had been allowed to hold my own grandchildren. I counted it on the calendar in my kitchen. 91 little squares since the last time 8-year-old Theo had fallen asleep against my arm. Since 11-year-old Etta had let me braid her hair the way her mama used to wear it. 91 days since my son-in-law decided that with my daughter in the ground, I was nobody to those children anymore, just the grandmother, an old woman he could close a door on. I spent my whole working life as a sign painter, putting people's names up over their doors in letters built to outlast them. And I want to tell you that a man tried to paint over me like I was last year's special. Like he could just brush a fresh coat across the place where I'd always been and call it done. He did not know what my daughter had done before she died. Neither did I. Not really. Not yet. This is the story of how a dying young woman reached out from the last weeks of her life and made certain that nobody, not even her own husband, could erase her mother from her children's lives. And of how I learned that the deepest love doesn't shout, it plans. It leaves the brushes out and the colours mixed for the work it won't be there to finish. My name is Birdie Larkin. I am 61 years old, and I live in a damp, green little town in the Coast Range of Oregon, where it rains 200 days a year and the moss grows on the north side of everything, including me. For 40 years, I was the sign painter for this town and 4 others around it. Before everybody went to vinyl and computers, if you had a storefront in these hills, the name over your door was most likely lettered by my hand. The bakery and the feed store and the funeral home, gold leaf on glass, enamel on board, names I built to stand up to 40 years of this rain. My husband Hal drove a log truck until his back gave out, and he died of a stroke 6 years ago. And after that, it was just me and my brushes, and my daughter Robin, and, in time, Robin's 2 babies, who were the whole of my heart in this world. Hal used to come by the shop on his lunch and just watch me letter. Said it settled him. Said there was nothing in the world steadier than my hand with a brush in it. He's the one who started calling me Birdie 40 years ago. Said I was always perched up on a ladder, lettering something like a little bird on a wire. I lost the man who named me, and then I lost the daughter we made. And you would think a person who had lost that much would have nothing left worth coming after. But grief, I have learned, does not make you poor in the eyes of the people who hunt families. It makes you a soft, slow, easy mark. Alone in a big, quiet house, too sad to fight. That is what they saw when they looked at me. They forgot that a bird on a wire is also watching everything below. Sign painting is a vanishing trade, and I am one of the last who can still do it right. The layout snapped out in chalk lines, the brush loaded just so. The slow, steady pull of a letter that has to look like it was always meant to be there. It taught me patience, and it taught me about names. A name over a door is a kind of promise. You understand? It says, "We are here. We will be here. You can count on finding us." I lettered the sign over the diner where Hal proposed to me. I lettered the sign at the bottom of the hill that still says "Welcome" with the town's name under it, that I touch up every few years for free, because somebody should. I even lettered the small bronze-look plaque at the cemetery gate, never once dreaming whose name I'd be reading through that gate before I was done. 40 years of putting names where the world could see them and trust them. And I did not know, until all this happened, that the most important lettering job of my life had already been done by somebody else, in a lawyer's office I never knew about, by my own dying daughter's hand. Let me set one thing down plain and not pick at it again, because it is the line the whole sign is drawn along. There is a kind of love that makes noise, that makes promises, that weeps and swears it will always be there. And there is another kind, the deeper kind, that goes quiet and gets practical, that fills out the forms and signs the papers and makes the arrangements, so that when the noise of grief comes, there is something solid underneath it that will hold. My Robin loved me with the second kind, and it saved my grandchildren, and I did not even know she had done it until I was on my knees. Hold on to that. It is the truest thing I know. Let me tell you about Robin, though it is the hardest part, so I'll be quick and gentle with her. The way you handle gold leaf. Robin was my only child, and she was the best work I ever did. Better than any sign. She grew up in the smell of my turpentine, perched on a stool in my shop doing her homework while I lettered. And she had my steady hand, though she never took up the brush. She married a young man named Garrett when she was 25, and I liked Garrett. I want that on the record because it matters later. He was a good husband and a good daddy for a lot of years. They gave me Etta, and 3 years after that, they gave me Theo. And I painted a sign for the children's bedroom door, their 2 names twined together in vines and birds. The finest small thing I ever made, because some signs you make for money, and some you make for love. Those 2 children were Saturdays to me. My whole week pointed at them. Etta is a serious girl, watchful like her grandfather Hal, and she took to the brushes early. And I'd set her up with a board and let her letter her own name over and over while I worked. And she'd get the tongue-out concentration that Robin used to get. Theo is a wild thing, all motion, and he could not letter to save his life, but he could mix a colour like nobody I ever taught. He'd stand at the bench and blend until he got a green that was exactly the green of the moss after rain, and hold it up to me, beaming. I have their handprints, the little painted ones, on the inside of my shop door, done one rainy afternoon when their mama was still well and life was still whole. I look at those handprints every single day. There were 91 days I looked at them and could not breathe. And then, 2 years ago, Robin got sick. It was the bad kind, the fast kind, and it took her in 14 months. And I will not walk you through that valley, because if you've been in it, you know. And if you haven't, I would not wish the map on you. I moved in for the last stretch. I held my daughter's hand, and I held the bucket, and I held myself together in front of the children, and came apart only in the car, in the parking lot of the cancer centre, with the radio on so nobody would hear. And in the last few weeks, when she was clear-headed between the medicines, Robin kept doing this thing where she'd grip my wrist hard with what strength she had left, and look at me with Hal's eyes in her thin face and say, "Mama, I've taken care of it. Whatever happens with Garrett, I've taken care of it. You just promise me you'll never stop being their grandmother." And I'd say, "Of course, baby. Of course. Never." And I'd smooth her hair and think she was just a frightened, dying girl needing comfort. And I'd pat her hand the way you pat a child waking from a nightmare. I have had to live with the fact that I patronized my daughter in those moments, that I treated the most important thing she ever told me as the rambling of the sick. Because she was not rambling. My Robin, with the medicine in her and the weight falling off her, and her own death 3 weeks out, was doing the clearest-eyed, most ferociously loving piece of work of her whole life. And I missed it. Because a mother watching her child die cannot always hear the steel under the softness. I'll come back to it. I have to, because it's the whole point, and because I owe it to her to tell it right. If you have ever loved a child you raised, and then had to watch them go on ahead of you into the dark, which is the one loss the human heart was simply never built to carry, and somehow carries anyway, then you already know the particular shape of the hollow I was living inside. And I would be glad just to know you're out there listening tonight, because we are a quiet club, those of us who have buried our own children, and we tend to find each other without a word, by something in the eyes. Tell me where you're listening from, if you would. It helps, on the nights it's heavy, to know the room isn't empty. But let me get on with it, because grief, as it turned out, was only the first thing that happened to me that year. The second thing wore my son-in-law's face. For a while after the funeral, Garrett and I held each other up. He was shattered, a young man of 36, with 2 small children and a hole where his wife had been. And I forgave him everything in those first months, because grief makes people strange, and I was strange too. I had the children every weekend. I made their lunches and braided Etta's hair, and let Theo paint with my good brushes. And it was the only thing keeping me upright, having Robin's children to love, seeing her in the turn of their heads and the sound of their laughing down the hall of my shop. I thought Garrett and I were a team. I thought we'd raise them together, 2 broken people, pooling what was left of our hearts to make one whole one for those kids. On the hard nights, I'd remind myself I wasn't alone, that Garrett and I had each other and the children, and we'd get through. Then Sloane came. I'll try to be fair to her, though I'll admit it's hard. Sloane was a woman Garrett met about 8 months on, sharp and bright, and very, very interested in starting fresh, in a clean slate, in a Garrett with no complicated past hanging off of him. And I was the past. I was the mother of the dead wife, the living reminder, the grandmother whose face was Robin's face a little, around the eyes and in the chin. Every time I walked into a room, I think, I reminded that household of the woman who'd been there before. And Sloane was not a woman who wanted to share a house with a ghost, much less the ghost's mother. From the very month she arrived, the temperature in everything changed. The weekend visits got harder and harder to schedule. Theo's 7th birthday party I heard about after it had already happened, from Etta, who whispered it to me guiltily, like she knew something was wrong. My calls started going to voicemail, then stopped being returned at all. And the words coming out of Garrett's mouth started to sound like a script written in somebody else's hand, a vocabulary that wasn't his, that I'd never once heard him use while Robin was alive. We're establishing new routines. The children need stability. They need to look forward, not back. And then the sentence that told me the whole story, said in Garrett's voice, but built in Sloane's workshop. Birdie, with all respect, you're the grandmother. You don't actually have any say in this. You don't have any say, said to the woman who had held his wife's hand while she died, who had cleaned her and dressed her and sung to her at the end. There was one day in the middle of those 91 that I will carry to my own grave. I drove over to the house because Etta's birthday was coming and I had made her something, a little hand-lettered card with her name done up like a queen's. And I knocked, and I could hear them in there. I could hear Theo's voice. And Sloane came to the door and opened it just a crack, on the chain, and told me through the gap that it wasn't a good time, and that I really should call ahead. And behind her, I saw Etta come around the corner into the hall and see me, and her whole face opened up. "Grandma!" and start to run. And I saw Sloane's hand come out and steer that child gently but firmly back the way she'd come. And the door closed, soft, in my face, with my granddaughter's voice still calling my name on the other side of it. I stood on that porch in the rain, holding a birthday card a long time. Then I drove home, and I did not cry, which scared me more than crying would have, because it meant something in me was starting to give up. A person can only stand at a closed door so many times before they start to believe they belong on the outside of it. It escalated the way these things do, with reasons that all sounded like they were for the children. First, it was that the visits were confusing for the kids, stirring them up before bedtime. Then it was that I was too emotional, that seeing me made them sad, that a clean break would actually help them heal, as if love were a wound and absence the cure. 91 days. That clean break stretched to 91 days of a closed door and unanswered calls, and a little hand-painted sign with 2 names on it that I'd carried back to my shop because I could not bear to see it hanging on a door that was shut to me. I would take it out and hold it some evenings. The vines and the birds, Etta and Theo in my best gold. And I would put it away again before I cracked. And underneath all the tender talk about the children's healing, I began to hear the other thing, the practical thing, the way after 40 years in business, I could always hear which customer was working his way up to stiffing me on a bill. There was money under this. There was Robin's life insurance. There was the trust she'd set up for the children's future. And there was the house. My Robin's house. The one she and I actually owned together. Because years before, I had put in half the down payment out of my sign money so the young family could afford a real home. Garrett, with Sloane's hand at his back, wanted a clean start somewhere new, a new town, a new life, a new wife, and no ghosts. And a clean start like that takes cash. And there was a good deal of cash sitting there with my dead daughter's name on it, and her baby's names on it. And I was the moss on the north side of all of it. I was the old growth standing right where the new development wanted to pour its foundation. Cut down the grandmother, and the whole lot clears. Now I have to tell you about the night I nearly broke. Because grief and helplessness braided together make a rope that can hang a person. And it nearly hung me. I'd gone to a lawyer by then, scraped together the money for a single consultation, and what she told me first sat me right down in my chair. She said grandparents' rights in this state were a thin, difficult, uncertain thing. That a fit father has the constitutional right to decide who his children see. That fighting him could drag through the courts for years and cost more money than I would ever have, and might, in the bitter end, only teach those 2 babies that the grown-ups they loved had gone to war over them. I drove home in the rain, which is the only kind of driving we have up here in these hills, and I sat alone in my dark shop, surrounded by 40 years of other people's names hanging on the walls. Every one of them a promise that somebody would always be there. And I thought, in the lowest voice the heart has, maybe she is right. Maybe a broke old widow with no legal standing and a bad knee has no business going to war over children who are not, on paper, hers, even if they are hers in every way that the heart keeps its accounts. Maybe the loving thing, the truly selfless thing, the Robin thing, is to vanish quietly and let those children heal without the tug of war. I actually had my hand on that surrender. I had very nearly decided to let myself be painted over, to be a clean white rectangle where a grandmother used to be. That was the lowest I have been since the grey morning Robin stopped breathing, with my hand on her chest. And then, sitting there in the dark, I remembered the envelope. "I've taken care of it, Mama. I've taken care of it." In the fog of the funeral and the year after, I had forgotten almost entirely about a large envelope Robin's hospice social worker had handed me a few days after she passed, saying Robin had left it with her with instructions to give it to me. Not to Garrett, to me. I'd put it in the fire safe in my shop, and I had genuinely, in my grief, forgotten it existed. I went out to the shop in the rain at midnight, and I opened that safe with my hands shaking. And I want to tell you what my daughter had done, my Robin, in the last weeks of her life, in between the medicines and the pain. She had not been a frightened girl talking. She had been a clear-eyed mother, building a wall around her children with the last strength in her body. Inside that envelope was a letter to me, in Robin's own hand, gone shaky at the end, but hers, and a thick set of legal documents, and a small flash drive. The documents, which Robin had quietly drawn up with a lawyer of her own that nobody in the family knew she'd hired, made me the co-trustee of the Children's Trust, the trust she had funded with the bulk of her life insurance, set aside for Etta's and Theo's education and their future. Co-trustee with full and equal authority, which meant in plain English that not one single dollar of that money could be touched, moved, borrowed against, or spent without my knowledge and my signature beside it. The Clean Start fund Sloane was counting on was locked, and I held half the key, and they had no idea. Robin had also signed and notarized a formal statement of her wishes regarding her mother's place in her children's lives, naming me, in careful, legally weighted language her lawyer must have helped her build, as a person whose ongoing relationship with the children she considered essential to their well-being. The precise kind of document that turns a thin and difficult grandparents' case into one with real teeth and a dead mother's voice behind it. And she had restructured the deed and the trust language on the house, so that her half could not simply be sold out from under me by Garrett to fund somebody's fresh start. My daughter, dying, with the medicine fogging her mind and the pain taking her body, had looked clear down the road and seen the exact storm that was now breaking over my grey head, and she had built me a harbour to weather it in before she ever let go. And she had told no living soul, because she understood the one hard truth about protecting something from people who will fight you for it, which is that you cannot announce it. You cannot negotiate it. You have to have it already done, already signed, already true, notarized and filed before the fighting ever starts. And the letter, I will not read you the whole of it, because some words are meant to stay between a mother and her child. But she wrote, "Mama, if you're reading this, then I was right to be scared, and I'm sorry. And I'm also not one bit sorry because I took care of it. Garrett is a good man, but he goes weak when he's hurting, and I won't be there to be his backbone anymore. You were always the strongest of all of us. Don't you let anybody, not him, not anybody, tell you that you're just the grandmother. You are the one I trusted with everything I love. Fight for my babies. I fixed it so that you can win." I sat down on the cold plank floor of my shop and I cried. But it was a different crying than the 91 days had been, because all at once I was not alone in it anymore. My girl was reaching forward out of the dark, with that steady hand she got from me, and taking hold of mine, and telling her mother to get up off the floor and go to work. The reckoning, when it came, was not a screaming match, And thank God for that, because those 2 children had heard enough grown-up noise to last them a lifetime. It was a quiet meeting in a lawyer's office. The same lawyer I went back to with Robin's envelope in my arms. She put on her glasses and she read through every page my daughter had left, slow and careful. And when she finished, she took the glasses back off, and she was quiet for a long moment. And then she said, "Mrs. Larkin, your daughter has changed everything. Everything. I have practiced family law for 26 years, and I have rarely seen anyone protect their children this well, let alone from a hospice bed." She wrote Garrett's lawyer a letter, and the letter did not threaten and did not rage. It simply laid the facts out flat on the table, like a winning hand turned face up. That I was co-trustee with full authority over the children's trust, so that the clean start money could not move 1 inch in any direction without my signature beside it. That Robin had left a notarized statement of her wishes that gave my standing as their grandmother a legal weight nobody on their side had imagined existed. That the house could not be sold over my head. Not now. Not ever. Because my dead daughter had seen to it. And then the part I made her put in, the most important part, that I was not interested in war, that I had never for 1 single day been interested in war, that I did not want custody, did not want to punish anyone, did not want $1 of that trust for myself, that I wanted exactly one thing in this world, the one thing Robin had asked me for with her hand around my wrist, which was to go on being those children's grandmother until the day I died. I watched it land on Garrett because I asked to be in the room, and I am glad I was, because what came over his face when his own lawyer explained, slowly, that his late wife had quietly armed her mother from beyond the grave was not anger in the end, though I'd braced for anger. It was something that cracked straight down the middle. They handed him the copy of Robin's letter that she had included for him, sealed with his name on it in her hand. And I watched that grieving young man open it and read his dead wife's words. And I watched him fall completely apart in a leather chair in a law office, his shoulders going, the sound coming out of him that a man makes maybe twice in his life. And Sloane, sitting right beside him, reached over and put her manicured hand on his arm. And Garrett, very gently, without even looking at her, moved his arm away. I think that was the exact moment the current let go of him. I think a good man can get so lost in the dark water of his own grief that he lets a strong tide carry him somewhere he would never in his right mind have gone. And that sometimes the only thing with the force to turn him back is the voice of the person he lost, reaching up out of a sealed envelope to grab him by the collar. Robin always could talk sense into Garrett when nobody else could. She did it one last time, on paper, from the other side. And Lord help me, it worked. We did not speak through lawyers after that day. There was no need. Garrett came to my shop himself, alone, about a week later, and he stood in the open doorway where 40 years of drying names hang on their hooks. And he turned his cap around in his hands, and he could barely lift his eyes to me. And he said, "Birdie, I lost myself for a while there. I let somebody talk me into being a man I'm not. Robin trusted you more than she trusted me. And the worst part is, she was right to." And I set down my brush, and I told him the only thing I had ever once wanted to say to him through all of it. I said, "Garrett, listen to me. I never wanted to take those children away from you. Not for 1 second. Children need their daddy, and you are their daddy. And Robin loved you. All I ever wanted was for you to not take them away from me. There was never going to be a war in this shop. There were only ever 2 people who loved the same woman more than their own lives, trying to figure out how to raise her babies right without her. And that big, grieving boy crossed my shop floor and put his arms around me, the way he used to before any of it. And we stood there together among all those hanging names, and we cried, the both of us, for the one name that neither of us would ever, as long as we lived, allow to be painted over. So here is where we are now, and where I'll leave you. I have my grandchildren back, every weekend and a good many days in between. And Garrett brings them himself and stays for coffee sometimes. And we are, the 2 of us, slowly becoming the team I once thought we'd be. The little sign with their 2 names on it, the vines and the birds in my best gold leaf, is back up on their bedroom door where it belongs. And I climbed the ladder and rehung it myself, with Theo holding the bottom of the ladder and Etta telling me it was crooked when it was not. Sloane is gone, as it happened that a man who'd been shaken hard awake was no longer the blank, clean slate she'd had in mind to write her fresh life onto. And I find, to my own surprise, that I do not have a single hard word left in me for her. She wanted and she lost, and the children won. And that is the whole of the justice I was ever after. The trust is safe, locked up tight the way my girl built it, sitting there patient and untouched, waiting on Etta's college and Theo's someday. And on that flash drive, the one I almost never opened, there turned out to be videos. My Robin, thin and bald, smiling anyway, propped up on her pillows in the last weeks, recording little messages for her babies to open on the birthdays she already knew she would not live to see. Sweet 16, graduation, a wedding day, maybe, if God is kind. She thought of all of it. And there was one at the very end, recorded for me, that I will keep to myself, all but a piece, because she looked into that camera with my own steady eyes looking back out of her wasted face, and she said, "See, Mama? I told you I took care of it. Now go let my babies paint with your good brushes." And then she laughed. My Robin. She laughed, 3 weeks from the end of her life, because she had already won the only fight that ever mattered to her. And she knew it. And she wanted me to know it too. So here is the lesson, the one I've gone and painted across my own heart, now in letters built to last. Do not ever, ever let anybody tell you that you are just anything. Just the grandmother. Just the old woman. Just the past. Just the moss. Just the thing in the way of somebody's clean new slate. The people who want you small are almost always the people who want something. And a lifetime of love poured into a family does not evaporate just because one grief-struck soul lost sight of it for a season. And then the other half of it, and I say this gently to those of you who know you are closer to your own ending than your beginning, because I know some of you are out there tonight, listening in the dark. Love out loud all you please, but love practical too. Make the arrangements, sign the papers, build the harbour before the storm is on the horizon, while your hand is still steady enough to do the lettering. Because the deepest love this old world has ever known is not the love that stands there and promises, "I will always be here." None of us can promise that. The deepest love is the love that, knowing full well it cannot always be here, goes quiet and gets to work and makes good and certain that you will be all right anyway after it's gone. My daughter loved me like that. From inside a sealed envelope, a full year in the cold ground, she reached up and saved her children, and she saved her foolish mother both. And she proved the one thing I'd spent 40 years with a brush in my hand trying to say. A name set down by a steady enough hand, in love, in gold, cannot be covered over by anybody. Not by a stranger, not by time, not even by death. If you stayed with me all the way to the end, then I think you might be somebody who's loved hard enough to know what I'm talking about. And I'm grateful for your company tonight more than you know. Tell me where you're listening from, and tell me, who's the one person who took care of you when they didn't have to? Who built you a harbor before you knew the storm was coming? Go thank them, if they're still here to thank. And if they're not, light something and say their name out loud. Names are meant to be said out loud. I spent 40 years making sure of it. Stay on a while, and I'll tell you another. The kettle's on, and the rain's coming down, and there's a stool by the bench with your name on it, in gold leaf, if you want it.